Next, from Springfield, Senator Dick Durbin meets with leaders in the agricultural community and hears about the impact the drought in southern and central Illinois is having on the state's corn and soybean crops, and why this drought will likely cause food prices to rise over the next year. This runs about 30 minutes.
Sherry, when I talked to the Secretary, one of the other things he mentioned, Phil and others that are here, he said get that farm bill passed because the current farm programs will expire, and is it the end of September? Am I right about that? Yes. The end of September, and then under some quirk in the law, we revert to an old farm bill, which is antiquated and can't do the job. So we passed the farm bill on a bipartisan basis in the Senate. I've got the vote here. I think it was 64 to 22 or something, just a couple of weeks ago. And now it's over in the House, and they're supposed to take it up soon. So the sooner we can get the farm bill passed, the better. But Sherry, give us kind of your overview from the federal program viewpoint, what we're facing in this state, and what we're able to do to help the...
Okay, because of this farm bill expiration, the programs that were available last year up until this crop year were SURE, that was a program that helped in disasters, the Livestock Incentive Program, the Livestock Feed Program, the Emergency Livestock Assistance Program, Tree Assistance Program, and we don't have any of those now because we're waiting for this new farm bill. And it's just essential that we get a farm bill that's going to help producers and get these emergency programs back on. And we don't want to go back to the, I think it's 1945, something, 48, something, anyhow. It would cost the taxpayers so much money to go back to that original bill that you just don't want that to happen. So yes, it is essential that Congress passes the new farm bill. We don't have very many programs, but we do have one small program that we're applying for, and that's the early release of Conservation Reserve Program acres. And we've 4 counties have requested immediate release. Otherwise, they'll be released August the 1st.
So tell,
after
in layman's terms, Conservation Reserve Programs are acres that are set aside not to be planted, right?
Correct.
And in this situation, they're in a reserve for conservation purposes. In this situation, what is going to happen with the release of those acres?
Well, if we can, we've sent, 4 counties have sent early release requests into the department. And if they're granted those requests, producers in those counties can graze their CRP acres immediately. That was before not possible, but the department's eased up a bit so that we could get this passed through.
So for those with livestock, this
yes,
makes a difference. For
livestock. And if it hadn't been for President Nelson, I wouldn't have known what was going on down in the Deep South, but he talked to an 80-year-old producer who said he's going to have to sell his cows because they were going to die from no food. And I talked to him yesterday, the day before yesterday, and he kept calling me lady because he couldn't remember my name, but that was all right. Lady, yeah, I'm the lady. There are people who would question that. Anyhow, he brought it all to our attention, and I'm hoping to see him when I go down there.
And you also you have these low interest loans, 2.25% emergency low interest loans.
For all secretarially declared disaster counties and adjoining counties.
26
already can
one
get.
Out of 4 counties in the state would be eligible for those loans.
Yes.
They're working on 4 counties to release a CRP for grazing.
Immediately, yeah.
And Farm Bill may have some other options. So Phil, take a look at the whole state from the Farm Bill point of view.
You're using my no. Oh, the microphone.
Well, Senator, thank you for convening this meeting. I think the frustrating part that we're hearing from producers is this was a crop, corn and soybeans, that went in as efficiently as we've ever seen it. Early planted, picture-perfect stands, and then basically the water spigot shut off. And we started hearing a number of people going back 2-3 weeks ago when I talked to Sherry and Bob about what was going on. And I think the concern that they had at that time came from the livestock sector, especially in deep southern Illinois. Pastures burn up. There's a shortage of hay. So they pressed us to talk to Sherry and Bob and basically the Secretary's office to see if we could have an early release of CRP ground for feedstuffs. The Secretary had a press conference this last week, as you know, and streamlined the process, which is going to be helpful once we get to the August 1st date to allow the haying to take place on those acres. Secondly, he reduced the early out penalty. There is a penalty when you bale CRP acres since they received sums of money for putting those acres into set-aside. Secondly, we approached the Secretary to see if there was any way possible, given the 15 at that time, now 18 counties, if they could have advanced direct payments, which would be coming out in October anyway, to allow producers to use some of those funds for cash flow, and secondly, buying feedstuffs, because we're hearing that from the dairy end, the pork producers, as well as the cattle people. And then thirdly, we have been talking about, as you said, a write-down on small business loans as such to make sure that our producers have adequate capital. This is probably the most expensive corn and soybean crop as it relates to inputs that we've ever seen in Illinois agriculture, given the prices of fertilizer, chemicals, diesel fuel. So this really does put quite a bit of onerous on a producer. The one salvation that we keep hearing from producers is we've got to have, as we write this next farm bill, a crop insurance program that works. And you take a year like this, as opposed to 1988, where crop insurance wasn't quite as popular as it is today, producers are trying to manage the risks, given not only Mother Nature, but the inputs that they have in these crops. This is one way that they can do it as far as depending on the level of crop insurance they take. So
Phil,
the Farm Bill is important that we get passed to have that in there.
Phil, I know this, you've been in farming for a while, till the gray hair. So you've probably been through a few droughts.
I have.
Can you put this one in, can you compare it to anything? I mean, in terms of the moisture that we've seen around here or in our state?
If you look at it from a subsoil moisture perspective, which is very important, especially that's where the roots are going down to try to fill corn ear, or as we get into pod set on the soybean side, we are at lower levels today than we were in 1988. And the 3 years that I recall since I've been farming, 1983 was very bad, 1988 was worse, and we had somewhat of a moderate drought in 1991. But when you look at those three, you put it into perspective for this year, we've had days, almost 30 days above 90-degree heat, which is almost a record. And we've had about a half a dozen days in excess of 100 degrees at the wrong time of year as we went through the critical pollination period. So if you look at it from that standpoint, this is worse than the other years.
I'm going to let Matt Hughes, I'm going to go to the actual producers here. But I want to turn it over to Matt Hughes from the soybean perspective, if we can pass the microphone. Matt was out in Washington last week with soybean producers, and we've talked about corn almost exclusively here. We talked about soybeans, because we're not number one, we're number two in soybean production, aren't we? Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very important crop to the state. Of course, I grow both crops, and everybody in this room does as well. It's corn and soybeans is what we grow in central Illinois, as well as throughout the whole state. If you grow one, you probably grow the other. And soybeans are, they're a little bit more, a diverse crop is why we grow them, because they do a little bit better in a hotter, drier year like this. So they're going to survive a little bit better, but they still can only take it to a certain point. They will compensate with relief here today. They're going to come back and do fairly well. But the long-term forecast I'm seeing, we're going to see some very depressed yields in soybeans as well. But, the big thing on the soybean front, is really our number one customer is the livestock industry, and I would kind of go back to some of those statements here. It affects the corn as well. We need to keep our livestock industry just as strong as, as we sit here worried about the crop out here. That's going to directly affect our livestock producers. If they can't get affordable grains, then they go out of business, and then next year our markets are starting to suffer because of that.
Matt, you gave me when you visited kind of a breakdown of what happens to Illinois soybean crop. How is it used? Where does it go? Say that for a few words of that.
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, so probably about 70% of the volume of our crop goes to livestock feed. About 60% of the value is there. The oil side is about half of our oil is used for human consumption, but we still have the surplus of oil that we can now use for biodiesel production. So we've got a great mix of products we use soybeans for. and it's very diverse, but it still comes back to livestock as our number one customer at the moment.
So at least from the soybean side, I'm sure someone can speak to the corn side. Shortage of crop in soybean is going to be reflected in the price of chicken?
Oh, it'll be in everything. In fact, when you look worldwide, our stocks for soybeans are more critical than they are for corn. And that's why you're seeing some very advantageous prices taking off here. But, you know, prices are getting good, which means higher prices for commodities like you just mentioned, chicken, beef, pork, in the stores. But unfortunately for a lot of my neighbors to the south and approaching me quickly is, you know, when you have lower yields times a high price, it's still a lower revenue.
And a higher priced soybean is going to mean more expensive biodiesel and more expensive diesel fuel as a result, probably.
Probably, yeah. Not quite as direct impact as we could see in some other markets, but you know, biodiesel still remains as a surplus commodity for us. We use that when it makes sense. We'll easily divert that to where it needs to be used before we take it into fuel usage.
Well, JD and Alan, why don't we make sure you use my phone and please say a few words about what you're seeing this year and how it compares to what you've faced in the past.
Senator, I guess, thanks for coming out today. The thing that's really affecting our operation really drastically, we have a calf operation, and these crep acres were way below on our production of
Explain
hay.
what that is.
And
What's a crep acre? Conservation
Reserve.
I've got to
Program.
translate this.
Yeah, we have CRP, the name of the Conservation Reserve Program. And wait until August, we're going to lose a lot of the protein value that we would have in this grass that we're able to bale now and feed to these cows. And the problem with the corn plant that you're seeing over there is the nitrogen level is so high on that plant that's out there, we can't chop it for silage because of the nitrogen, which will poison the cows when we get ready to feed that to them and the calves. So we got to let that go down, and when the stalk turns brown, again, we lose the nutrient that stalk. So it's really critical that we get these released now. The August deadline that we have on with the wildlife, those birds have left those areas because there's no water. They went to streams, creeks, wherever they can get that water. Those areas, we got some crep acres, and I drove out through them just with the truck to see if there was anything out
Tell
there.
me worst case scenario. If I look at some of those tiny little ears of corn, worst case scenario, farmer gives up, says that's it. So what does he do at that point? What value is left in that field?
Well, some of these over here, like in our operation, what we'll do is try to chop it for silage so we can feed it to some cows to keep our cow herd.
What the nitrogen issue you raised, I hadn't heard before. So there's a question
Well,
about whether
basically,
you can feed it?
Yeah, the corn plant, see, basically, we apply nitrogen in the fall and spring. And that's what really keeps the corn plant green. Then it converts over into the kernel. And as that kernel not being developed because of moisture, like Phil talked about, sub-moisture around here was really terrible. We didn't have any fall moisture carried through the winter. So that nitrogen stays in that corn plant until it actually dies. And then when it dies, then that will go out into the atmosphere. But so nitrogen is really critical in this corn plant right now.
So if you chop down the field, gave up on it, for silage, does it have to sit for a period of time? Is that how it works?
You couldn't put it in a silo, and you couldn't put it in a bag. If you stack it out on the ground, I was visiting with Illinois Beef about this. If you stack it out on the ground, you might get some of that nitrogen level out. But you got to test it, because if those nitrogen levels get too high, you'll basically kill the cow.
So see if you can help me here. Let's
Yeah.
just, what are corn prices now, recent corn prices?
Old crop corn is just a little bit under $7, right around the $7
Okay,
range.
soybeans are what, 9? Soybeans?
No, soybeans are
14.
14.
So give me an idea of impact for consumers who drive by these cornfields when corn prices go up because production is down.
Okay, the consumer basically looks at the plant out there and they think that corn ear is there, and it's not. Like JD basically pulls some of these back here. We thought we had a 50% corn crop. Today, when I come in here, we got a 20% corn crop or less. So the consumer, when he goes to the grocery store, that steak that's costing him $8 or $9, it's going to double or triple because the consumer
Meat prices,
is going to go out of the row.
poultry prices,
It's going to go out of the row.
okay.
Pork It's gonna go out there
What's
because
this
we
gonna
don't
do
have.
on the ethanol side? Any idea the impact on ethanol?
Well, it's not gonna be there.
It's gonna be too expensive,
Correct, it's gonna
right?
be too expensive, so we'll have to use more foreign oil, which, we're trying to keep ethanol to keep that down.
What percentage of Sangamon County or any area you may be familiar with, do you think of the farmers have crop insurance?
We just talked about this the other day. I think we're about 65% of the people, maybe a little higher than that. We've encouraged them, Sangamon County Farm Bureau, for everybody to have options, but say probably 65 to 70% of the farmers in Sangamon
So
County.
if it's an absolute wipeout, which I hope it isn't, absolute wipeout, 2 out of 3 farmers have bought insurance to at least keep their head above water. They shouldn't use that analogy, there's not enough water.
Yeah.
They'll be able to operate, we'll have enough with crop insurance to continue
Survive.
another year.
Okay.
But there'll be producers out here, and the lending institutions are talking to us already. They're really concerned because of, a guy that basically cash rents 50/50 or don't own a lot of land, his net worth is, they're really risky. So crop insurance is something we really need.
Let's talk to your buddy here. JD, tell us about what this has done to you and
Well,
your farm.
hadn't done anything other than a few sleepless nights since we really started getting out looking at this corn, because the windshield, as we would call it, the Gucci tour of driving by these fields, we like Alan said, we felt pretty good, especially here just west of Springfield. I've been told it's kind of one of the garden spots of the state all spring, so I've been believing it. And when we got out looking at this stuff after that 100-degree days there 2 weeks ago for a week, we were surprised what we're finding, or not finding.
You've been through this before?
I've been doing this 30 years. And, 88, we used to raise a lot of seed corn, so I can tell you that was a bad year for raising seed corn. And I'm sure it's going to be a bad year. We don't do that anymore, but I know it's going to be a bad year for the seed producers out here. That's one of our concerns for next year already, is seed availability in the seed corn. So, but as you saw over there with those ears, those fields have all produced 200-plus bushel corn in the past. And, as Phil said, this was the perfect year for putting a crop in.
Incidentally, those are prime corn fields
Yes.
in Illinois,
Yeah,
200 plus.
those are all within, 5 to 6 miles is the furthest I went away to those here. And, so the potential for a record crop was here. And if we go another 7 to 14 days with it looks like the forecast, I think we're going to see a crop deteriorate at least right through here in the next 10 to 14 days faster.
So you need relief. You need relief before the state fair.
Well,
Yes.
yeah, and even, as you said, if it starts raining now, it's gonna stop the bleeding. We've done the damage.
Yeah.
We've done the damage. We might put a little more fill in this, but we've got corn starting to dent, which means it's starting to get close to maturity. And once you start denting, you might put a little bit of pounds in that ear, but it's starting to pull out the moisture out of those kernels, and so.
Well, going back to Alan's point, what's worst case scenario?
Yeah.
Don't get the rain, what do you do?
It's gonna be a pretty
You
short.
can quote him on that.
It's gonna be a short,
Would you consider a loan? Do you think you and your dad
Now,
consider a loan?
it's been good in agriculture for the last 2 to 3 years. And I'll just be honest with you, I considered not taking crop insurance this year because, we're in good shape right now. And then the more I considered, I've always told people, stay the course. If you do, you can't be popping in and out of these programs. That's been my preaching to the younger guys, so I finally said to myself, take your own advice. And so we took crop insurance. And it is critical, I deal with a lot of people out of the ag sector and talk to them, and I say, we used to have a stack of money that we put in a crop like this. But now we're dealing with a stack of money like this. And our risk percentage, we're still talking about the same returns, the biggest problem, but we're risking a lot more money when we put a crop out here. And that's why this farm bill and this crop insurance, that, we don't want to come to the government when we have these problems. That's why this insurance is in place. We got to be smart enough, to protect ourselves. We're business guys, we're big boys. We know the risk out here.
Okay.
And if we've got that available to us, we just got to be smart enough to take it. And so.
I didn't get to say hello to you, but can
I'm
you?
Grant Nolan.
With corn growers?
Yes.
Good.
I'm-
Well, you're going to be the last one to say a few words. First, if you can, tell us a little bit about Illinois' corn crop in general. Where does it go? What is it used for?
Well, I apologize for my tardiness.
No, no, no.
I just came on corn growers, and also I farm with my family in primarily southern Macon, Christian County, so a little bit to the east of
I
here.
knew a fellow named Nolan from over there.
You wanted me to tell you hello.
Is that your father?
For us, I will echo your comments on a little bit of a garden spot over here. I mean, it's nice to come over here because things just honestly look a little better.
You'll have to look at the corn on the table.
Well, the sad thing is, Friday, our family hosted a group of 4th and 6th grade inner city Decatur kids at our farm. And they came out, and the outside row of corn is generally less competition, more sunlight, more nutrients. It'll be bigger. So we had all the kids come out and stand on there, and they could peel back, shuck back the row, or the ear corn, look at it. And I think we had maybe 50 kids in the first group. And I walked around and looked, and I picked a spot. I think the Decatur paper was there, so I really wanted our corn, the ears of corn, to look good. So I picked a good spot, and the kids started shucking it back, and I thought, man, I'm going to have to find a different spot. And each kid, I mean, the corn crop, as you guys have mentioned, it looks a lot better than it is. And it's unfortunate because, as you've mentioned as well, we started, this is my 3rd year engaged in production agriculture. So I went to work post-graduation for the commercial side, and then came back to farming and picked an interesting 3 years to start farming. But it's been truly an interesting start. I haven't been as optimistic in a long time on this year, how we got started, and things have slowly deteriorated.
Yeah. It's similar to what we're facing. I mean, east of here is not much different in terms of moisture, rainfall.
It's a wide swath, and we're very fortunate, I will say that to begin with, because some of the land that we operate on is some of the best in the state. And that's why our crops, considering everything, still have that sort of ear. If the further south you go, yeah, they might not be, they're just not blessed with this fertile.
JD, so they don't have to move the cameras, why don't you go grab some of those, maybe someone can give them a hand over there and bring them on over here, and we'll just take a look at them. But let's open it up to, thanks, Grant, and open it up to any questions the press might have before we take a look at the actual.
Senator just passed the farm bill, so they're going to get 2-point-something% low interest loans. When would that take effect, and whenever that takes effect, is that going to
Put the good ones in front of me.
help for this year's crop, or the farmers just going to have to eat the losses of this year?
Well, Secretary Vilsack, for those counties, which, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's okay, that have been declared as drought disaster areas and contiguous counties, so that's 26 out of 102 counties, they are eligible for these low interest rate loans, 2.25% interest rate. So a farmer can borrow that amount of money to tide them over until the crop insurance pays, or to get them through best they can by the end of the year. The new farm bill that we passed in the Senate is a different bill. We talked about direct payments, they'll be gone, but the crop insurance program in there is still very strong. And as you can tell, for many producers, that's what they rely on. What we want to make sure is that we get the House to get together, pass their bill, and get this done. I want to get it done before we break for August. We passed our bill a couple weeks ago. They're working on theirs now. So the sooner the House moves on this, the better.
There's been so much contention on Capitol Hill, this sounds like one that there wouldn't be. Have
Well,
you talked to the Speaker?
No, I can tell you, they've had some controversy, and they've debated it back and forth. But we passed it 64-35, and where I do business, that's a pretty darn good vote. It shows pretty strong support on both sides of the aisle. So I'm hoping that the same thing will happen in the House. Usually the farm bill is a bipartisan bill. I might tell you that when you look at the actual expenditures in the bill, the largest share of it is for nutrition and feeding programs, not agriculture programs per se. So you have a lot of people not from farm areas who are interested in school lunch, WIC program, other things that are part of it.
The people who are eligible for the 2.25% interest loan, do you have to have crop insurance for that, or you don't have to? Is the criteria you just have to be in a county that's a disaster area?
Sherry, you want to answer
It
that?
is.
You just have to be in a county that's
Yes.
a disaster area? Okay.
But the next year, I think you have
You
to.
have to have crop
You have to
You
have
have to
crop
have crop
insurance,
insurance
yeah.
next year. They have to,
Take it.
the second year have to have crop insurance.
You mentioned 4 counties have already asked for the release.
For
of
early
the-
release, yes.
Can you name those counties?
I can. It's Adams, Schuyler, Cass, and Green.
Could I ask Alan and JD to comment on these ears of corn here, that this just isn't the early stages, unfortunately? And tell us a little bit about what we're looking at here. You might,
Basically, what you're
Alan,
looking
pull
at-
that microphone over closer so they can hear you.
Like this corn plant here, it just didn't pollinate in that heat that we had that 1 week that really above 90-some degrees. So we got a little bit of pollination right in here, but here on the backside, you can see we only got 1 kernel pollinated, the rest of these didn't get pollinated. And as this heat continues, some of this was pollinated out to the end, but you can see this here is starting to dry up because these were just picked today. That'll keep aborting and just coming back. So this here could get half the size it is right now if we don't get any rainfall in the next week to 10 days.
Yeah, and the other, one thing we haven't talked about that is when you have a drought like this is you have a thing called aflatoxin.
Oh, yeah.
And
Are we back into that?
And we haven't even touched that. So even the grain.
I've been at so many times. Give me the refresher course. Tell
Well,
me what
I'm
it
not
is.
sure I can refresh maybe one of these other guys. It's not a good deal.
Not a good deal.
It's basically the weight of the kernel, and if we get some rain now, we could get some test weight, but the test weight will be so light, and when you do that, it's aflatoxin, and that gives everybody's out to get the product for nothing. When they dry a lot of this corn, because they don't have any test weight, it just shrivels up to nothing. And,
So even if you did harvest something, you may run into the aflatoxin.
the quality of the grain is gonna be terrible. As these ears right here is, I mean, this
Now,
corn's gonna be.
let me play it out for the obvious. I talked about the impact on consumers. There are a lot of middlemen involved in this too. There are grain elevators.
Right.
People hauling grain and, right on down the line, from the barges on the river to the trains and rail cars, everybody, it starts a ripple effect right through agribusiness. So
Well-
these folks are on the front line. The consumers are at the end of the process, but in between is a whole raft of people involved in agribusiness industry.
Machinery dealers,
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's
We,
affected.
we visited with Director Fleiter on Monday, just this past Monday. We'd had a meeting set up with him for 30 days just to go in and visit with him, and unfortunately, we got to talk about the drought. But, the ag economy's been the real, bright spot in this state.
It's been good.
It's been good. I mean, it's been the one bright spot, and, this can have repercussions for not only this year, but for 2 to 3 years to come, probably.
One point to follow up on that, we farm it's a long-term business. It isn't just year to year. And when you think of that, I think one thing, Senator, you can help us, and we challenge the Secretary of Agriculture the same, is, we did plant the largest corn crop. We need to instill consumer confidence that we can still grow enough corn, hopefully, across the Corn Belt to produce enough for food, fuel, and feed. And I think that's important, especially when the importers of a lot of our commodities, 30 to 40% of what we grow ends up in the export channels. And we've been there before, that we need to instill, reliability on behalf of our country in supplying those markets.
Any other questions?
Trying to sort of figure out what the criteria it takes for a county to be named a severe drought area. I see something in this press release how it talks about severe drought for 8 or more consecutive weeks. That's a new total.
Yes.
What did it used to be, and is that kind of the main division?
I don't know what it used to be. It's 30% loss, estimated 30% loss, and drought conditions by the drought monitor for 8 consecutive weeks.
Some of the farmers, you said 60% have crop insurance, I think in Sangamon County. Does anyone know statewide a good field?
Phil might have it.
And if you could expand, why does it matter that we have a drought this year? Why would it affect you 2 or 3 years out if we had plenty of rain next year?
Well, basically, I'll use the cow-calf operation. And Director, when we was at your office, they was talking about a guy that usually buys about 100 cows a week for slaughter. and last week he bought 300 head, if I believe. So without the feed, without something to feed the animals, the cattle or the pigs or the chickens, you know, they got to get rid of them. So as a result, that comes back to the consumer because it's not going to be as much on the shelf, and the prices are going to go up.
And you just don't repopulate these herds overnight.
Sort of an artificial lowering or stabilizing of meat prices right now because of this influx of cattle into the slaughterhouses. But you know, what's going to happen down the road, as you mentioned, as they're trying to bring back those herds, you know, that's what's going to be driving up the cost of food, and that's going to be years down the road. So that's one way that what's happening today could have a direct impact in the future.
Yes. Two quick questions. Number one, as far as a little bit on a couple of times I've known you're very concerned about what it might do to food prices. Is that a number one concern? And thus, I mean, to hold consumer prices down, we've seen in the past market restrictions, some kind of a restriction of demand. Would you favor anything in that regard?
Consumer demand? What kind of
market demand, restricting the demand, whether that be restricting overseas sales, domestic usage, or whatever, to hopefully contain food price
Well,
rises?
I hope we don't reach that. I don't think that's a good outcome. As tough as the free market can be on us, and it can be, I think we still have to allow that mechanism to work its way through. We try to put in a safety net, and crop insurance is the first part of that. But by and large, we've had good years. Farmers have done well in those good years with this market, and I think if we get into government mandated restrictions on export or this and that and the other, we ought to think long and hard before we consider that.
The other question then would be that I didn't hear mentioned that, since I farm as well too, concern about water, not just for farm, but for some of the rural communities. Reservoirs are low. We've seen wildfires. I mean, there's a lot of this would burn right out here today. Pretty wild. Any thoughts as to what we can do for municipalities or small rural towns to assist them some way in water, or any contingency plan that the ag department?
That's a very good question, and I wish I knew more. Can you say something to
Well,
it?
I'm just going to, you know, I was just visiting with Matt earlier. In this, right here in this, our general area, since April 1st of last year, we've had 2 rains that were, rain events that were in excess of 1 inch. Is the only, we've had 2. We had 1 inch and 4/10 last June, whatever date, and then May 24th, right here, and this is what we've been living on. We had 2.4 inches, and it wasn't a very big area. But every other rain for that length of time have been less, most of them are 8/10 or less.
So what about the water supplies for the towns?
Well, I'll just tell you, our water supply, we've got a creek where we pasture our cows. 30 years it had never gone dry till last November.
We're hearing that downstate, that there are wells that are running dry.
So,
Here in Springfield, they are pumping out of North Fork and South Fork. They're not able to pump as many gallons as what they're removing today, but if you look at the Sangamon River, it's as low as I've seen it in 40-some years through our farms.
So I'm going to really get in trouble now. But I had a hearing, and I brought in the insurance industry to talk about weather patterns in America. I said, leave the environmentalists over there, leave the politicians over there, insurance industry, tell me what's going on. And the fellow testified, said, be prepared to say every summer for the rest of your life, this is the hottest summer I can ever remember. He said, we believe there's going to be more extreme weather events happening, and that's why we're getting out of the insurance business in some parts of the country. We just can't create a reserve for that next hurricane or next event. And we've talked about this in the past, and we have differences of opinion on this, but let me just ask a general question which maybe we can't answer here, but I think we ought to ask. You just talked about 40 years observation on a river. Are we living in a place that is getting warmer each year in terms of average temperatures? Is this going to affect the way people will farm in the future, or is we're just going through a bad patch here? I think I know there could be some difference of opinion on this, but go ahead.
I think weather cycles, and we're in one of those cycles, is my firm belief. I don't think we've got enough history to go back thousands of years to see a true pattern. So it's just part of the game.
This is part of our conversation every time they come to Washington.
It was awful cold and snowy here 2 winters ago. How's that?
And I agree with what JD said. Our ponds are lower than they've ever been. That's what we're scared to death. We water our cows with ponds, and that's why we really want these CRP acres released, because at least where that's at, we do have city water, so we can get the cow herd down there. Try to haul water to 70 head of cows and calves. It's unbelievable. I've got a good friend that's hauling 4,000 gallons of water a day to his cow herd and can't hardly stay ahead of it. So it's critical, but I'm optimistic like JD. We're in a pattern.
You got to be optimistic. You're a farmer.
Yeah, that's right. And I think we can get some ground moisture, get some sub-moisture back. I tilled a lot of land the last 5 to 10 years, so I think rain is going to come again, or I wouldn't have put all that tile there.
Any other questions?
I'll just add to that. There is a respected climatologist, Alan Taylor, and he's really been telling us we've been long overdue for this drought. I mean, droughts are a course of business when you talk about agriculture.
Yeah.
We're definitely in a weather cycle. We've had some of the best corn producing years I've ever seen that we just came out of, and now we're in one of the worst. So, and next year, who knows?
And droughts always come from the southeast, and Georgia's been in a drought for 2 or 3 years, so it was just a matter of time before it got here.
And they still are.
Yeah, so.
Yeah. Anything else? Yes.
Senator, it's my understanding that almost all the lower 48 states have some drought somewhere, and it's really widespread from the Rockies east. Your colleagues in the Senate, do they talk about this? Is this gaining national attention from lawmakers from around the country?
It is, and it's manifest in a lot of different ways. Look at Colorado. Look what they just went through over the last several weeks, some of the worst fires they've ever faced. And so you find it in different areas. There are some parts of our state that have been spared and some parts of the country that have been spared. But I think at the end of this summer period, we're going to take a look and say, this has been pretty tough on a lot of different people, starting with farmers, but a lot of different communities, water for communities, fires, and the rest. So it is going to call for our taking an honest look at it in terms of what we can do.
Will this ever be a topic on a Sunday morning show? Is it going to be that important or that well noticed?
I don't know. Usually they don't get into ag topics. Right. It's really rare, but this one is going to affect everybody. And that's the point I try to make. It isn't just the folks that are gathered here today. The consumers are going to feel this in a lot of different ways. I've started the alternative fuels, alcohol fuels, biofuels, and all the rest. This is going to affect them as well. When the price of the oil seed or the price of the corn that's used to create this fuel is going up, and the price of a barrel of oil is going down, it reaches a point where you may not be able to stay in business. And I might tell you that most ethanol operations require a tremendous amount of water.
That's right.
So they're kind of hit in 2 different directions.
Sometimes, this is a little bit out there, sometimes you kind of hear like fringe stuff on the internet, like about around the world that they experimenting ways to produce rain naturally with clouds and stuff like that. Has there been any talk on Capitol Hill or anything about maybe researching that stuff more?
Rain dancing and things?
Yeah.
No, it hasn't come up. But I will tell you this, that what we're finding, and now we get into another area of some controversy, we're finding that seed corn folks are developing modified seed corn, hybrid seed corn that is drought resistant and moving in that direction. And that is controversial in some parts of the world. But I think it reflects several things. First, we want to be ready for whatever's coming. And secondly, there are parts of the world that live with this and have to determine whether or not it is even feasible for them to have a corn crop, for example, or soybeans under those circumstances.
Senator, I don't know if it's a question for you or perhaps Bob Flider, but if relative to some of these communities, I mean, they're running out of water, is there any prohibitions, federal prohibitions of taking fresh water out of Lake Michigan if we actually hit that kind of a disastrous scenario that towns are running out of water?
I will tell you, Lake Michigan's down. I mean, it's, I was just up there over the 4th and visited parts of it, and it's down, and it's been down several years. So, you know, there'll be some genuine concerns about the impact of that on the Great Lakes. And when it comes to human survival, we do what we need to do. That's number one. But number two, some of these things just have impacts beyond the obvious, and we have to kind of think these through. I don't know if we've quite reached that point yet.
And Bob, I know the governor's had pensions on his mind for a long time, and other. To what extent have you had conversations with him about what's going on in the agricultural community? To what extent could you say that that is on the governor's radar now?
It's definitely on his radar screen. He did convene the Drought Task Force, and which met last week, and the task force will continue to meet. It includes the Soil and Water Survey folks, folks from DNR, EPA, those who are who understand and our water systems and tributaries. And the picture is not a really good one when you look at the streams or the water in the streams throughout the state. At the same time, you know, this group will be monitoring the situation in individual communities. And I think to the point of your question, I think Senator Durbin said it right. You know, we're going to do what we have to survive. And I think the idea there is to put out information so that communities know their situation, gather information so that, hey, let's face it, you know, communities need to really be thinking about being proactive, working with their citizens to ensure that there are safe water levels. But, you know, there are conversations about bringing anybody who has anything to do with water or water flow to take, whether it's local communities, DNR, which monitors lakes throughout Illinois, U.S. Corps of Engineers, Army Corps of Engineers. That's sort of a discussion point that the group will be meeting with. So it's a lot of monitoring, making sure that we stay ahead and understand what could be coming to be preventative if possible. And so he's very concerned. He's also concerned about agriculture. He's going to be heading down to Southern Illinois tomorrow to take a look firsthand at some of the situation and the crops down there, and working with President Nelson and the Farm Bureau. So he's engaged, he understands, and is very concerned about what he calls the #1 industry in the state of Illinois.
Let's take a look. Can we take a look at a field nearby?
I want to just give one more point. I was visiting with a fellow in the crop insurance industry. Their company writes in 20 states, primarily north of the Ohio River, but from Colorado to the East Coast. He said usually they have 15% claims. They're anticipating claims this year 80 to 85% of their policies.
And let me tell you, the crop insurance program is critical.
Yes.
But 62% of the premium is paid by the federal government. So when we get into an era where we're paying out, you know, it turns out to be negative on the side of our spending in terms of what the program costs. So we're going to be there. We have to be there. We should be there. Direct payments are gone, and this you want crop insurance rather than disaster payments.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And that's you're exactly right. We need that subsidy, and we've got to be smart enough to take that crop insurance.
Yep. Thanks.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.